Hello, welcome to the Richmond Public Library. I'm Meldon Jenkins-Jones. I'm currently the Library Community Services Manager over at Hull Street Branch Library. And today we are here for an author talk with Melissa Harris. And Melissa is going to talk about her book, 1 pound, 12 ounces, a preemie mother's story of loss, hope, and triumph. So Melissa, take it away.
Thank you very much for having me. So as the title indicates, I obviously have had a premature baby who, shockingly enough, was 1 pound, 12 ounces at birth. And the way that the book is put together is we start kind of in the early phases and work our way up to him. And so the book is not just about prematurity, but also the struggle I had getting to having him. Things that people may not have heard of, which I'll be honest, I hadn't, are things like secondary infertility. So I decided early on I wanted my daughter, said to my now ex-husband, let's have a kid. He said, okay. I was pregnant. Everything was fine. When it came time for the second, I had a really, really hard time getting pregnant. And eventually had to go see a fertility specialist. And I will never forget walking into his office and the specialist sort of looking at me going, well, there's no way you have any children. I was like, I can introduce you to her if you'd like to meet her. And he's like, no, it's impossible, because I had a number of physical abnormalities that he felt made it impossible for me to have a child. Through that, I suffered multiple miscarriages, including second trimester twins, and had really gotten to the point where I was going to give up, and I decided to give it one more go. And that's when I became pregnant with my son. And it was a pretty normal pregnancy until it wasn't. And I went into labor with him actually at 23 weeks and sat in what's called Trendelenburg. And in fact, I've got some pictures that I can add to the discussion. So just as a quick side note, this is in fact his actual birth footprint next to a quarter. So that's actual size for scale. But I spent 6 days in the hospital lying in what's called Trendelenburg, which if you have ever been in Trendelenburg, I can tell you all the blood rushes to your head. You feel like you're going to fall off the bed. Eating and drinking is amusing. As I said in the book, I spent a lot of time licking oatmeal off of my pillowcase as opposed to eating off a spoon, because it was just easier that way. But Trendelenburg is a really surreal experience. And my daughter at the time, who was a little bit before 5, was totally amused by it, because she would get in the bed and it was like a roller coaster for her, where she would go sliding down. But I spent about 6 days like that, trying to use gravity to retain the pregnancy and get me to that magical viability line of 24 weeks. I know nowadays, this was in 2010, so some things have shifted a bit, and viability is now in that kind of in the 23-week spot, but it's still 24 is considered the baseline of viability. But I had to lie like that for 6 days. And in that time period, it got to a point where I wasn't even allowed to move. So if I wanted to switch positions, I had to have a slew of nurses come, and I don't even know how they did it, rotate me from side to side to back to side. At the end of it, I made it to 24 weeks and 2 days and had my son, Sam. Despite the fact that he was 1 pound, 12 ounces and 12 inches in length, I had to have him via C-section, which this is detailed in the book some, but when you sit up from lying in Trendelenburg for 6 days and all the blood was at your head and you suddenly sit up, I passed out directly onto the nurses when they went to go put the epidural in so I could have my C-section. It was quite a scene. Woke back up and I was like, come on, guys, let's go. Let's give birth. What's happening here? I had no idea I had passed out on them. When Sam was born, this is the first picture we have of him. He It's funny for me, I just see a baby. For anyone else, it's not the most normal looking thing. His skin is this very translucent. It's very, very thin and fragile. His eyes, as you can see in this picture, were fused shut. And he was small, very, very small and fragile. But for me at the time, I just saw my son and I thought he was beautiful. So in the pictures we have, this is me finally being wheeled in to see him for the first time. This is actually, this bag here was warm liquid to keep him warm. This diaper next to him always cracks me up. That's actually one of the small preemie diapers, not the one he was wearing, because there's apparently 3 levels, but this is a preemie diaper for scale. I do not have abnormally large hands, but this is my hand over Sam, giving again a little bit of a sense of scale. This diaper that he had in the beginning, we had to fold in half to put on him so that it wouldn't cover his face. The first time I got to hold him, the first time his sister got to see him, and then progressing along in different, he went from being on a ventilator to different forms of air support. So I've learned a lot of acronyms, CPAP, CPAP. So this one here is actually CPAP, and that has forced air going in, but it's not quite the same as being on a ventilator doing all the work. And here, with his eye opening. But yeah, I mean, the book really chronicles the 95 days that we spent in the NICU, the neonatal intensive care unit, which is for anyone who's experienced it, it's sort of like dog years. One day in the NICU is like 7 years of your life. Every day is different. You can go in and everything's fine, and then it's horrible, and then it's okay, and then it's great, and then it's horrible, and that's all within about a 3-hour span. It's a very overwhelming experience. You're in this room with nothing but medical professionals and the sounds of a hospital and no natural light, and you're constantly kind of gritting your teeth and holding your breath as you never know what's going to happen that day. And for me, I had another child at home, and so I would spend all day in the hospital, come home to be there when she got home from school. Once she went to bed, I would go back to the hospital, and I just was there constantly. I talk a lot in the book about this, the fact that I kind of had convinced myself that this was normal in a way. And this picture here, I talk about a lot in the book, that this was my favorite picture of me and my son. It's the first time I ever held him. And months later, I was looking at this picture with my brother, who was visiting finally he lived in Africa at the time. And I said, "Oh, here's the picture." And behind me, I hear this, "Oh, that's the picture." I was like, "Well, that's a different tone." And he's like, "Yeah, this is the one that made me drink all the tequila in the house." Because it really showed for him just how small and fragile Sam was. As I said, the NICU is a very overwhelming experience. This is a snapshot of Sam's room with the isolette that he was in. Each of these individual machines were attached to wires to Sam, and we're giving him either fluids, nutrition, medication, whatever it is that he needed. This was the CPAP machine that was helping him breathe. And it was just all shoved into this little corner. And of course, the monitor that you spend all your time staring at to know whether or not he's breathing enough, is his heart rate high enough? And you just sit in a chair and stare at all that stuff and get overwhelmed constantly. And at the same time, you also bond with the nurses that are there and the doctors and the social workers. So a little more of the photos. So I call this the first family photos, my daughter with my son and me. First time Sam got to wear clothes. That was a fun day. It's my mother holding him. And this was Sam's first play date. I had become very good friends with another woman in the NICU. And the day before they got released from the hospital, she broke her son out of his room and broke every rule in the hospital and brought her son by to meet Sam in person before he left. And the two are still very good friends, which I love. One of the things that's really common in preemies is something called a PDA. So every single baby born has a PDA. It's a valve in the heart that is open when they're in utero, and it is to allow blood to flow from the placenta into the baby. And usually at birth, that valve will snap shut and then the heart functions normally. For Sam, it didn't. And it was a very unsettling period. Because his heart wasn't pumping enough blood, his kidneys wouldn't work. Because his kidneys wouldn't work, he couldn't pee, which would then cause other things to start shutting down. And so when Sam was about a month old, so at that time he had lost a lot of weight. So he was a little over 1.5 pounds. He had heart surgery to repair the valve, and they actually go in through the back. And so this was post-surgery. I always joke with him now that he should, when he's older, he'll get to tell ladies that he took a knife in the back in a bar fight defending someone, or he can come up with good excuses for his large scar. You know, having a second child while you have a child in the NICU is a really different experience. Irene, which was my daughter, was very scared of the hospital, very scared of Sam. We were very lucky that my cousin is a child life specialist who worked with Irene and helped us come up with ways to help her visit him on her terms. You know, no child, if you say to your child, do you want to go see your brother? They're pleasers. And so they would say yes. And she, of course, didn't want to go because it was not normal. And my cousin really worked with us to never ask her, let her ask us. And we set up a code word for her that if she said the word pickles, she would leave immediately from the hospital. No questions asked, no judgment, no nothing. And it made her very comfortable. And once she got into it, we had her come by one day and I told her nothing. I just made her sit in the chair. And before she had a chance to protest, I put her brother in his arms, and this was the result. And it's my favorite pictures of my children to this day. One of the characters in the book that is very present is Nurse Laura. She was the primary nurse for Sam, and in all honesty, she was my nurse. She was there during the day, so she was with me most of the time. And she just kept me in line and kept me sane and kept me moving forward. Again, it can be really overwhelming and scary. And anytime I would get to a point where I was not pleasant to be around, Laura was good enough with me to tell me to knock it off, to go home. You know, she was just great. And she is actually still a part of our lives, because without her, I don't know if either of us would still be here. The book will take us through all of Sam's life in the NICU and then up through his first birthday. So just some pictures of him as he is looking more like a normal baby, meeting one of his two namesakes. This is my grandfather, his great grandfather, also Sam, and with my father. We had a scary moment when Sam had been home for about 2 months where my ex-husband broke the baby, fell asleep holding him, and dropped him on his head, which resulted in 3 skull fractures. What I've learned is if you're going to have skull fractures as a baby, doing it really early is great because your skull has not fully fused yet. And we spent just a night in the hospital for observation. But I just thought it was cute that he was in a little cage. And I did not blame my ex-husband. Everyone has fallen asleep holding a baby. He just had bad luck that he zigged and Sam zagged at this exact moment, and it wasn't great. One of the things I had done to sort of chronicle him growing is I stopped doing this at 9 because now it's just, you know, he's got giant hands, but it was kind of capturing how he has grown. I thought this did a really nice job of capturing it, of, you know, it started with my finger fitting in his entire hand up until, his hand's almost the same size as mine now. And then it's always important to have that hope at the end. This is Sam. He's 12. He has the best dad jokes you've ever heard. He is obsessed with F1 and NASCAR. He loves animals, and he is just a hoot and a half, and very healthy. So, prematurity is one of those things that you don't really know what you're going to get at the end. Are you going to have a brain bleed? Is there cerebral palsy? Do you have lung issues, learning disabilities? There's a lot that they don't know, other than Sam being on the spectrum. If you lined him up in a room and said, pick out the former micro preemie, you're not picking Sam. He's tall, he's beefy, looks just like a normal, average 12-year-old boy. So that's kind of an overview. Stop sharing my screen really quickly. But yeah, so I wrote the book for a couple of reasons. One kind of main one is 1 in 10 pregnancies in the United States, or 1 in 10 births in the US, is premature. And I think a lot of people don't talk about it. And I found when I went into labor that people came out of the woodworks of, oh yeah, I had a preemie, or my cousin had a preemie, or it just seemed everyone knew someone that had had a premature baby. But when I started this, I thought I was all alone. And it's so much more common than everyone thinks. And it's not talked about, and you're never prepared for it. When you go to your prenatal appointments, nobody ever talks about prematurity as a possibility. And so when I went into labor, I was completely unprepared. I had absolutely no idea. And so I wrote the book to help others that either are at risk of premature birth, are just curious about it, have a daughter or a daughter-in-law that might be giving birth prematurely, might be going through it themselves. I know, for me, I craved anything, any knowledge in that time, because I was absolutely clueless. And so this is just my homage to every preemie mom out there and what we have gone through. So that's me talking a lot and rapidly and dumping a lot on you. I'm curious if anyone has any questions for me.
Thank you, Melissa. That was an amazing story. And I know a lot of us who have not read the book will now want to read the book. How long did it take you to write this book?
So a long time. I started on it. So the book started as a blog, actually. When I mentioned that my brother was living in Africa, he was in rural Lesotho working at the time with a very large time difference. And so I started with an email to him that was really long. And he said, it's not just me that's going to want these updates. You should write it somewhere where everyone can see it. And so while I was still in the hospital after having Sam, I started a blog. I have family in South America and friends around the world. And so I would start every day writing. And it started as therapy in some ways. In some ways it was to inform people. But I would come home from the NICU and I'd have all this information and everything in my head, and I needed to release it somewhere. And so I would release it on paper or virtual paper. And so writing every day kind of became my therapy in a way to keep people informed. And over time, I had a friend who's like, this is good. This should be a book. And so I took it from the blog and kind of worked on it and massaged it for, a long time, let's be honest, and turned it into the book that it is. But it was inspired off of the blog that I had kept.
I'm sure this is in your book and you might cover this, but in regard to your own physical recovery, like what did that journey look a little bit like as you were a postpartum mom as well as visiting your infant in the NICU, were you guys staying at the hospital for extended time? I know that was a two question in one.
So it's actually, there's a couple of answers to that, because there's the physical recovery and the mental recovery, because I think those are two important distinctions. So I had to have a C-section again, and my recovery was not graceful. I ended up actually with a post C-section infection, and I'm going to try to block the sun that is apparently directly in my face. So I was actually not allowed to drive for the first month after having Sam. I almost bled out in the NICU twice after having him. And it turned out it was because there was an infection that they hadn't found, but it was very, very difficult. I was in the hospital for 4 days post giving birth and then sent home without him. And so I would get up every morning. I had to pump as if I had a newborn at home. So I had a alarm set on my phone to wake me up every 2 hours to pump. So I was sleep deprived like I had a newborn at home. I would be driven every day by either my mom or my dad or my now ex-husband to the hospital. I would spend all day there and pump there and come home with my little cooler of breast milk. And then try to parent a 4 to 5 year old and then go back sometimes to the hospital. And yeah, it was a lot. And once they found the infection and treated it, things did improve because I was able to drive again and I wasn't randomly bleeding and exhausted all the time because I was fighting an infection I didn't know I had. But on top of that, there's also all the mental, there's blaming yourself. Did I cause this? I have learned that medical terms, especially for things involving women, are just horrible. They decided I gave birth to Sam because I had an incompetent cervix, which they really need to come up with a better term because that is about as insulting as you can get. It just means that my cervix wouldn't stay closed, but it was incompetent, didn't do its job. So I felt a lot of guilt. There is a lot of preemie moms suffer from postpartum depression for obvious reasons. They were robbed of a birth experience. You're robbed of the pregnancy experience. Like I never got to feel him kick, for example. The guilt over it. And then a lot of preemie moms also suffer from PTSD, which I did suffer from. It took me a while to learn that. I know what my triggers are now. Hospital soap and I do not get along. So if I'm ever in a hospital environment, I have to bring my own soap to wash my hands because I just can't. So it was not easy.
I have a question. Is it okay, Meldon, to go ahead with it?
Sure. Yes, definitely.
Yeah. Your story is amazing, by the way. I'm so thankful to hear your story. I actually have a close friend who deals with very similar things. All of her children are born. She actually was told to stop having children because of her incompetent cervix.
Yep.
Yeah. And so your story hits very close to home. I honestly I'm so thankful, Meldon, you're recording this so that I can pass this along to her to show her that you can go against what the grain is or so just I'm so thankful. Thank you for sharing your story. My question has to deal with what kept you going? What helped you along in the times of hardship and suffering? Because your story is not one that comes with ease, but you persevered through the hard. What helped you to keep going? Because Sam looks so healthy and beautiful and wonderful. It was so wonderful to see the pictures. Thank you for showing those. I actually watched this with my youngest daughter. And honestly, it brought me to tears seeing him grow from a newborn baby who was a pound to a wonderful, thriving human being. Yeah.
Well, thank you. Yeah. So how do you get through it? I think, the callous answer is you don't have a choice. You kind of just have to.
Yeah.
I think I got through it with hindsight. The way I think I got through it is, one, writing. I found an outlet. I found a place to process everything I was thinking and feeling. And I didn't try to hold it in. And so I know writing, and I hate saying writing my blog, but writing the blog was really vital for me.
Yeah.
Because again, there's so much information you're given throughout the day and so many feelings, and just have a place to kind of put them. And so they're not stuck inside you was really important. The other things that got me through, I was blessed to have my parents live a mile from me. And without them, I would not have made it through. They were instrumental with my daughter. They just dove right in and stepped in, but also with me. One of my parents was at the hospital every single day for at least a couple hours with me. So I wasn't necessarily alone in the hospital, whether they were sitting in the family room just waiting
Yeah.
or in the Sam's room with me, but I had that support. Two more things. The other was the primary nurses. So again, Nurse Laura, being a part of the medical team. So it's really important when you're in the NICU, you actually are one of the most important parts of the medical team. And I was lucky that the nurses my first week were really good at pushing me to become that team member. They taught me how to read, the vital signs on the monitors, what to look at. Like they would write input. How much did he eat? How much did he digest? How much did he pee? How much did he poop? There are things called Brady's and apnea. So that Brady's are when the heart rate would drop, and apnea is when the oxygen levels would drop. And they taught me what that meant and really how to kind of recognize the signs. And within a week, if I would say, I want to hold Sam, I remember the nurse looking at me one weekend and she said, okay. And I was like, well, aren't you going to hand him to me? And she just said, no, you're his mom, pick him up. And I was like, oh, okay. And it was, but it was so empowering. It was really important that these nurses pushed me in that way.
Hold on, baby.
And, the other thing is because I'm a pretty open person. I'm a pretty direct person. We had a very direct relationship. And if I was not behaving properly, like if I would go in a crabby mood and yell at people, they would kick me out and tell me to go home and do something else because I was not helping anyone. And that was really helpful. And the other thing is I found another NICU mom. A lot of times in the NICU, you've got a mix of people from the long-termers. So those are the ones that have babies like mine, really premature, or who have medical issues. And you have the short-termers, the ones that come in and are there for a day or two and are gone. And I found a long-termer really early on, and she and I just connected. We both had daughters the exact same age. We had sons. We liked a lot of the same things. She is one of my best friends in the world to this day, but it was someone that I could be like, oh my God, I can't believe Sam had 4 Brady's, and I wouldn't have to explain it. She would just be like, yeah, I hear you. And that was huge as well. So it's finding your people, ensuring you have support. And when people ask you can I bring you? The answer is just yes, whether you need it or not. I learned how to say yes. And then finding a way to take my self-care was writing.
Thank you for that. That's amazing.
Okay. There were some questions in the chat. Let's see if I can pull this up. Okay, here's a question. It says, were you a person of faith before this journey? And how did this impact your concept or view of God or your spirituality?
So I always view myself, I'm culturally Jewish more than religiously Jewish. For me, I don't know if this had any impact at all. I just think what it strengthened for me was was family more than spirituality, and how important that family support was and having those people around me. I was not raised in a religious household, and it was just never really been a part of my life. But I know for me, it definitely inspired me more to hold those that stood by me closer and to learn how to let go of those that did not. So in some ways, I would say that's spiritual to some. And for me, that was what I got from it the most.
Another question is, if you had one piece of advice to give to someone, the mother of a premature baby, what would it be?
Talk. Just don't do it in silence. If someone says how you're doing, be honest. Just be open, talk, be clear, be direct, be transparent. This is a horrible thing to try to suffer through alone. And again, you'd be surprised how you might find someone who's gone through it. And for me, being open really is what got me through it. It's just so important. The idea, and this goes again into the infertility and the miscarriage issue as well. The number of people that suffer from infertility and the number of miscarriages in this country are staggering. And for some reason, we as women and people who can be pregnant are trained to be quiet about it and not talk about it and don't publicize it and don't let people know about it. And that means that not only have you had to suffer this trauma, but you're suffering it alone. And I think my advice on all of it is talk about it. The more you talk about it, the better you feel. And you don't know, you might actually be helping someone else who has suffered through it or will be suffering through it. So talk, just talk.
Thank you so much for sharing your story. And so for context, I previously was an early intervention provider, so working with families of young children, many of whom had had time in the NICU and other medical complexities. And I had professionally spent time in the NICU environment as well. But now I work as a faculty member and train future professionals who work with families. So if you could share, what do you wish had been available and there for you that wasn't? What do you wish someone had said to you that never happened? Or what advice do you have for professionals who will be working with families who have had these traumatic experiences that you've had?
Thank you. That's actually a great question. I feel very lucky again that I don't have a lot of negative towards what I went through. I think the most important thing is to remember that, yes, the baby is your patient, but the parent is part of the team. And the way that I was integrated into the medical team and how they talked to me as if I mattered was so important. And the way that I was empowered by these nurses to, just because my son was in the hospital didn't mean I ceased to be his mom. And so the fact that if I was there, they were like, oh, I don't have to change any diapers, or, I don't have to keep an eye on that because that's her job. And I think it was really important for me because I felt like I could do something. Because, when you give birth prematurely, you feel very helpless. It's not like you're able to nurse your child or take your baby home or rock your baby simply. There's a lot in there. And so even the simple task of saying, oh, it looks like it's almost time to change out his IV, I was doing something. So I think really it's to remember that the parent is a part of the team. And this, I mean, this carries all through. So obviously my son being autistic, I'm with an IEP, so I'm part of his teaching team. And so it's just really important to empower the parent and keep them involved. You know, I knew none of the medical terms and people took the time to teach them to me. And that was really important. I think that's the most important thing. On the negative, the really important, I think it's with that empowerment. So I had one nurse I couldn't stand in the NICU who was just awful to me and awful to my family. And I'm not shy about speaking up. And so I pulled the nurse manager aside. I said, I don't ever want to see her in the room again, ever. So reminding parents that they have that right is an important one. And then, you know, it's hard because not everyone has a bedside manner, and we know that. And some bedside manners can't be taught. But knowing if you don't have a bedside manner is also important. I had a perinatologist come in when I was in Trendelenburg trying to hold Sam in, who was just like, well, your baby's going to die no matter what, so you need to let the pregnancy go. And I was like,
Oh my God.
okay, I don't know you, I don't like you, but you're going to have to leave now. And so it wasn't that it's just his bedside manner was crap, and he's well known. Like other people who have read my book, I don't even know his name. I never bothered to learn it. I didn't think he deserved that. So I called him Dr. Doom. And I had someone reach out to me who had read my book, who lives here, and said, I know exactly who you're talking about. I had the same experience. So it might be a little bit of humility checking for professionals, that if you don't have that bedside manner, make sure someone's in the room with you who might.
Mm.
Thank you. That's really important. Yeah. In
Melissa.
talking with a lot of other families who've been in the NICU after, long-termers,
Yeah.
they have sometimes talked about how the transition to home, so long anticipated, but then very chaotic. And it's like,
Yes.
there's waiting and waiting and waiting, and oh, you're going home in 8 hours. Wait, what? I don't know. You know, that kind of, what can we do as professionals to make the transition to home not chaotic?
So couple things. One, and they did this to me in the NICU, is they turned off the monitors. They wouldn't let me look at him for the last week because you could spend so much time staring at him. And I was like, how am I going to know if he's having a Brady or apnea event? And so the nurse just looked at me. She said, oh, that's simple. Turned it off and said, now you got to figure it out. I mean, she would obviously turn it so she could see it. But I was like, whoa, hey, now that's some crazy idea. So I think that's one thing is very important, is, you know, trying to help the parent understand that you will know. And I do think that there has to be at least a day's warning, because I mean, bringing home a preemie is not the same thing as bringing home your baby. And especially for me, like I brought Sam home in the height of cold and flu and RSV season, which meant that not only were we coming home, but we were not allowed out. I learned lockdown early. We were not allowed out of the house for 5 months. We were told until May 1st. So we came home December 20th, that until May 1st, we had to stay home with no really limited visitors. And if we went out, only in uncrowded outdoor areas. So you couldn't walk the aisles of Target. You couldn't go to the grocery store with him. So I think giving people at least a day's notice is a good thing. But in some ways, ripping the Band-Aid off is kind of nice, because you just have to become the parent. I think if there are the services in the area, so we have the regional center of the East Bay here. I'm in Oakland, California. So we had a visiting nurse that came out once a week. And that was because we qualified under the program of having a baby under 1,000 grams. That was really helpful. And so making sure that the parents know all of the resources that are available to them in the area. We got a developmental pediatrician that we could go to. who would track things from a prematurity standpoint that was associated with the hospital. We had the visiting nurse. We have the regional center that helped provide respite and other care. So knowing all of those that were available to me was really helpful.
I'm just in awe, Melissa. I can't imagine going through what you went through, but it was definitely worth it to have a now healthy child. So
Well, and it also, I mean, I just want to little shout out to my daughter. She turned 5 when my son was in the hospital and grew up really quickly because of it. And it has turned her into a pretty remarkable young adult as well. I mean, she now wants to she wants to become an art therapist and work with children because a lot of the experiences that she's had being Sam's older sister. So it's, and I found this really amazing community of people. I'm very hard to say I'm lucky about it, but I feel lucky at this point. Maybe not at the time, but now with hindsight, definitely.
I urge all of you to go out and buy the book and read it and share it with your friends or get them to buy the book. And the book is called 1 pound, 12 ounces, a preemie mother's story of loss, hope, and triumph. And this is from Melissa Harris. Melissa, we are so grateful to you for sharing your journey with us.
No, thank you very much. I appreciate it a lot.